I always thought strength announced itself. It stood tall, spoke confidently, and never hesitated. Strength belonged to people who knew who they were and where they were going. People who didn't second-guess every decision or lie awake replaying conversations in their head. I never counted myself among them. That morning began like so many others, too early, too quiet, and already heavy. The alarm rang, and for a moment I stared at the ceiling, negotiating with myself about getting up. My body felt tired in a way sleep never fixed. Still, I moved. I always did. I believed showing up, no matter how empty I felt, was proof that I was holding it together. In the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. My eyes looked dull, rimmed with exhaustion I'd learned to hide. I practiced a small smile, the kind that said I'm fine without inviting questions. I had become very good at that smile. The day unraveled slowly. I spilled coffee on my shirt. I forgot my headphones. Then I missed the bus. It shouldn't have mattered. It was such a small inconvenience. But something inside me cracked. I stood there watching the bus disappear down the street, my chest tight, my throat burning. It felt like confirmation of everything I feared, that I was always a step behind, always struggling with things that came easily to everyone else. I sat down on the curb, hugging my arms around myself, willing the tears not to fall. People walked past without noticing. Cars drove by. The world continued as if I wasn't sitting there, quietly unraveling. That invisibility hurt more than I expected. For a moment, I considered going home, crawling back into bed, pretending the day hadn't started. It would have been easier to give up than to face another day feeling like I wasn't enough. But I didn't. I stood up, adjusted my bag, and started walking. Each step felt heavy, as if my doubts were pulling me backward. As I walked, my thoughts grew louder, memories surfaced. Times I was told I was too sensitive, too quiet, not confident enough. Times I believed those words, and shrank myself to fit them. By the time I arrived, late and out of breath, I braced myself for embarrassment, for disappointment, for judgment. But none of it came. No one said anything. The world didn't collapse because I was imperfect. That realization followed me for the rest of the day. Maybe I wasn't as fragile as I thought. Maybe the story I'd been telling myself, that I was weak, incapable, always failing, wasn't entirely true. I didn't feel strong. Not yet. But something had shifted. For the first time, I wondered if strength wasn't about never falling apart, but about continuing forward even when you do. That thought stayed with me, quiet but persistent, like a door I hadn't known was there, slowly beginning to open. After that morning, something inside me stayed unsettled. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it lingered in the background of my thoughts, gently questioning the way I lived my life. Once you start noticing how tired you are, it becomes impossible to ignore. I began to see how much I carried every day without ever acknowledging the weight. I carried expectations, first my own and everyone else's. I felt responsible for being dependable, agreeable, and capable at all times. Saying yes had become a reflex, even when I was already overwhelmed. I told myself it was maturity, that pushing through exhaustion was part of being strong. But in truth, I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped. At work, I took on more than I could handle. When someone needed help, I was there. When deadlines piled up, I stayed late. I rarely complained, not because I wasn't struggling, but because I didn't want to be seen as weak. I believed strength meant silence. One afternoon, as I stared at my screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard, I felt something unfamiliar. Resistance. My chest felt tight, my thoughts slow and tangled. I wasn't lazy or distracted. I was exhausted in a way that sleep alone couldn't fix. When my manager asked if I could take on another task, my automatic response rose to my lips. Yes, of course, I can handle it. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I paused. The silence felt dangerous. My heart pounded as if I were standing on the edge of something irreversible. Then, in a voice that barely sounded like my own, I said, "I don't think I can take that on right now." I waited for disappointment. for frustration, for consequences. None came. My manager nodded and said, "That's okay. Thank you for telling me." That was it. The world didn't punish me for honesty. No one questioned my worth. No door slammed shut. I returned to my desk, feeling shaken. Not because something bad had happened, but because nothing had. That moment followed me home. I thought about how often I had ignored my limits, how I treated exhaustion as a personal failure instead of a signal. I had been carrying more than I realized, not just tasks, but the belief that I had to earn rest. That night, I let myself stop. I didn't push. I didn't plan. I didn't apologize for needing a break. For the first time in a long while, I listened to my body instead of fighting it. I began to understand that strength wasn't endless endurance. It wasn't about proving how much pain I could tolerate. Strength could be quieter. It could look like honesty, like boundaries, like choosing not to break yourself just to meet expectations. I wasn't suddenly fearless or confident, but I was learning something important. Acknowledging my limits didn't make me weak. It made me real, and slowly, that truth started to feel like a different kind of strength, one I could actually carry. I didn't realize how much I had changed until the moment everything went wrong. It happened late at night, when the world feels thinner and bad news carries more weight. My phone rang, cutting through the quiet. I almost didn't answer. Something in my chest warned me that this call would change the shape of my life, even if only slightly. I was right. The words on the other end came slowly, carefully, as if softer delivery might lessen their impact. But they still hit hard. A situation had unfolded that couldn't be ignored, couldn't be postponed. Fear rushed through me, sharp and sudden, stealing my breath. My first instinct was to shut down, to let someone else take control. That's what I had always done when things became too heavy. But no one else was there. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, and forced myself to stay present. My hands were shaking, my thoughts racing ahead to everything that could go wrong. Still, I listened. I asked questions. I repeated details to make sure I understood. My voice wavered, but it didn't disappear. After the call ended, the room felt impossibly quiet. I wanted to cry, to curl in on myself and pretend I hadn't heard anything at all. Instead, I stood up. I paced the room, breathing in slow, uneven counts, grounding myself in the sound of my footsteps. There were things that needed to be done, and somehow, I was the one doing them. I made decisions I never thought I could make under pressure. I reached out to the right people. I gathered what was needed. Every action felt surreal, as if I were watching myself from a distance. I wasn't calm or confident. I was terrified. But I kept moving. At one point, I caught my reflection in a dark window. My face looked pale, eyes wide with fear. Yet there was something else there, too: focus, determination. I barely recognized it. Hours later, when there was nothing left to do but wait, the adrenaline faded. That was when the weight hit. My body began to shake, and tears finally came. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, letting myself feel everything I had held back. I had always believed strength meant staying unbroken. But that night taught me otherwise. I had broken and still functioned. I had been afraid and still capable. I hadn't needed certainty or bravery to act, I just needed to keep going. As dawn approached, exhaustion settled into my bones. But beneath it was something unfamiliar: pride. Not loud or triumphant, but quiet and steady. I had faced something overwhelming and hadn't disappeared. That realization stayed with me. Strength hadn't shown up as confidence or control. It had shown up as presence, staying, listening, acting, even while afraid. I didn't feel invincible. I felt human, and for the first time, I trusted that being human might be enough. After that night, I couldn't return to who I was before. Something fundamental had shifted, like a lens being slowly turned until the picture came into focus. I began to see myself differently, not as someone who barely held things together, but as someone who had endured more than I ever acknowledged. For so long, I had measured strength against impossible standards. Strength was being fearless. Strength was never needing help. Strength was pushing through pain without complaint. By those definitions, I had always fallen short, but now those ideas felt incomplete, even cruel. I started noticing the quiet ways strength appeared in my life. It was there when I woke up on mornings I didn't want to face. It was there when I chose honesty instead of pretending everything was fine. It was there when I let myself rest without calling it laziness. I also began to let go of comparisons. I had spent years watching others seem to move through life with ease, wondering why everything felt harder for me. But I was learning that everyone carries invisible weight. Just because someone else made it look effortless didn't mean it was. In conversations, I stopped minimizing my experiences. When something hurt, I allowed myself to name it. When I needed help, I asked. These small acts felt risky at first, like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. But each time I survived them, my confidence grew, not the loud kind, but something steadier. I thought often about my past self, the one who stayed silent and pushed through no matter the cost. Instead of judging that version of me, I felt compassion. They did the best they could with what they knew. They weren't weak, they were surviving. Redefining strength also meant accepting my emotions instead of fighting them. Fear didn't mean I was incapable. Tears didn't mean I was failing. Exhaustion didn't mean I was broken. They were signals, not flaws. Some days were still hard. I still doubted myself. I still felt overwhelmed. But now, those moments didn't erase my progress. They were part of it. I realized strength wasn't a single moment of courage. It was a practice, a series of choices made again and again to stay present, to be honest, to keep going even when things felt uncertain. This new definition didn't demand perfection. It made room for mistakes, for rest, for healing. It allowed me to be both fragile and capable at the same time. By letting go of who I thought I had to be, I made space for who I already was. And that person, imperfect, learning, still standing, was stronger than I ever gave them credit for. The day I realized I was stronger than I thought didn't arrive with clarity or celebration. There was no sudden confidence, no moment where everything felt fixed. Instead, it came quietly, settling into me over time, revealed through reflection rather than revelation. I noticed it in the way I responded to challenges. When something went wrong, I no longer immediately blamed myself or assumed failure was inevitable. I paused, I breathed. I reminded myself that I had faced difficult things before and survived them. That trust slowly built, and hard-earned changed everything. I still felt fear. I still doubted myself. But those feelings no longer controlled me. They became part of the experience instead of the end of it. I learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward alongside it. Looking back, I saw how much I had grown. The person who once believed strength meant silence now spoke when something mattered. The person who thought rest had to be earned now allowed it without guilt. These weren't dramatic transformations, but they were real, and they lasted. There were days when old habits resurfaced, days when I overworked myself, when I hesitated to ask for help, when self-doubt crept back in. But now I noticed those moments sooner. I corrected myself with kindness instead of criticism. I no longer treated setbacks as proof that I hadn't changed. Strength, I realized, wasn't something I had to constantly prove. It wasn't fragile or easily lost. It stayed with me in the choices I made, the boundaries I set, and the compassion I showed myself. I also understood that being strong didn't mean I would never break again. Life would still bring loss, disappointment, and uncertainty. But I trusted myself to handle those moments, not perfectly, but honestly. I trusted myself to reach out, to rest, to rebuild. That trust was the greatest strength I had gained. If I could speak to the person I once was, the one sitting on the curb, convinced they weren't enough, I would tell them this: you don't have to become someone else to be strong. You already are. Strength is not found in how much you endure, but in how you care for yourself while enduring. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see someone invincible. I see someone resilient. Someone who has been afraid and continued anyway. Someone who learned that strength can be gentle, patient, and deeply human. And that understanding stays with me, steady and unshakable, the quiet proof that I was always stronger than I thought.